Thank you, Mario Blaszczak, World Business Press. President Draghi, you stressed that the emerging market development is a worry for the Governing Council in terms of the growth outlook. How would you judge if China slowed down to 4.5, not 6.9%, and how big of a threat is that for the inflation outlook, not for the growth outlook? And how big threat for the inflation outlook is the resilient exchange rate of the euro? That's the first question. The second one, the last part of your introductory statement, you mentioned the structural reforms. This is a repetitive point you are making. Structural reforms are very important for countries, and just yesterday the Eurostat pointed out that the level of the government debt in the euro area countries is growing, and that only small countries, only 3 countries actually fulfill the master criteria. So what would you say, what would be your comment on that? Thank you.
Thank you. You see, on the first question is quite important. There are 2 ways to respond. One is to look at different channels of propagation of what happens in China towards the euro area. And then there's a different way. Well, let me first explore this way. First of all, we look at all these channels, namely direct trade channel or indirect trade. The direct trade channel, the conclusion is the exposure of the euro area to Chinese economy is not very significant. After all, the exports of the euro area to China are 6% of the total. However, there are some countries where such a figure is higher and reaches 10%, in the case of Germany. Still, it's not, I would say, it's not exceptional. The second is so-called indirect channels, where you have also to account for the changes in oil prices and commodity prices that a higher recession in China would imply. The third channel is the financial channel, and again we see not a very significant exposure of the euro area towards China. But then there is another channel, which is the confidence channel. We think that so far what happens, the growth in China hasn't affected confidence in the rest of the world, and more specifically the euro area. At the latest meetings in Lima, the IMF confirmed the growth projections for this year as far as China is concerned, which are above 6%. So this is not, I mean, your perspective is not something that is on the screens now. Of course, any very large surprise in a very large economy might have the potential to affect confidence worldwide. And then we would have to see in which way and how to cope with that. The second question was about, oh, by the way, the other thing is, the other dimension to this is when we say that it concerns the effect of lower oil prices on our economies in general. We've been saying several times that most of the reasons why oil prices are low have to do with supply conditions, and the demand conditions play only a minor role. Now, recent analysis suggests that we should be more cautious about this, because to the extent that the investment in oil production had been geared in the past on the basis of projections of demand, which turned out later to be less than expected, this is also a demand-induced oil price shock. and has different consequences on inflation and inflation expectations than it would if it were supply shocks which was supply determined. I think I've answered your questions. Thank you.
Channel of exchange rate. I'm sorry. I also tried to ask about the channel. How strong is the channel of the exchange rate for the inflation projections, medium-term projections?
Regardless of what happens in China. Of course, one of the downsides I mentioned before, one of the downside risks to our inflation projections comes from the exchange rate. As I've said before, the nominal effective exchange rate has been appreciating over the last few months, 4 or 5 months, to a somewhat significant level. But let me restate, the exchange rate is not a policy target for the ECB. It's never been. It's not now. And however, it's significant, as I've just said, for price stability and for growth. Thank you.